hopefully I'm sharing the correct screen here. You can see my slides.
Yes, you can. No, it's all
great.
right.
Okay, yeah. So the agenda isn't long for this, and it's really just meant to be, you know, a brief kind of introduction on why we did this, what use it has for our tissue procurement core, and how to utilize it, and then just follow up with any questions at the end. So the background on this is that the laboratory had this concept around this project request tracking system, or what they called the PRTS. And it was a standalone web application that it didn't have any connection to any other application. So it was hard from a maintenance standpoint, you know, unique user logins and the functionality that was only driven by that application. But the point of it was that the user, and it had a really very, very simple use case, was a user would log in and enter what they wanted done to specimens, either that they were going to drop off to the lab, or specimens that were in the lab that they wanted pulled out and, you know, things done to it. And when I'm saying the lab, I'm meaning the tissue procurement core, that what I described before as our TPC, the main oncology core for the Simon Cancer Center. So it's very basic, very fundamental, but there was, you know, that connection not being facilitated against the application that actually housed the biospecimen data. It just was very challenging when somebody would say in the application, I need 10 aliquots of specimen B, and the lab would go, what are you talking about? What is specimen B? We have no idea. And there was always this disconnect and miscommunication going on. And so our goal was to replace this PRTS system with something with an OpenSpecimen, so that it could streamline that process, so that the lab knew exactly what that person was requesting. They knew exactly what the specimen label was because it's in OpenSpecimen. Now that covers only half the use cases, because there is the use case of I have these 10 specimens in my area, and I want to bring them to this laboratory for them to do something with. And in those cases, you know, OpenSpecimen doesn't know about those specimens, and there's a way for that to be handled in the project tracking system now. But it's kind of the corner use case. The majority of folks that have requests are requesting services against specimens that exist in OpenSpecimen. So of course that, you know, the goal being to kind of get rid of all the other things I talked about. So, you know, it's a common login, it's everything in one application. It makes everything easier to track, because it's the project, the specimens and the tasks and the services all together. And in OpenSpecimen is pretty user friendly. Some folks are familiar with the application already from using it, and we could capture more information about the specimen in the request. So we could do things like, you know, the exact services that are requested in a kind of a harmonized, standardized format, where people aren't just free texting what they want done, and that's pretty powerful. So again, this is kind of the basic functionality, and it's a kind of a hierarchy like this. And I put some screenshots on here just to give you a flavor for what it kind of looks like in the application. So at the highest level, we have a concept of a project. So a project is just a container for reusable service requests. So it's a one-time creation, and it's associated to like a PI, any collaborators that are requesting services against specimens, and it has the laboratory that you're actually collecting or requesting services from. So in our case, that's 100% always the tissue procurement core, what we call our TPC. But for other institutions, it could very well be different laboratories performing different services. But like I said, in our case, it's always the one. So you have the concept of the project, and then you have many requests that can go against this project. So maybe you have a a project that you're requesting 10 specimens be processed into DNA January 1st, and then in June you're doing the same thing, you don't have to create another project. You just create another request against that project. So that's the middle section here. So you can have, it's one-to-many relationship. You could have a ton of different requests against a project. And this is where the meat and potatoes of things happen at. So this is where you're telling the system what specimens I want associated to what services. And then we have a way of tracking the different statuses of the service. So if the service is still pending, if it's completed, or if it's not done, things like that. That's kind of just explained down here, down at the bottom too. So the actions that are requested to be performed on the specimens, and where they're done at the lab site, and things like that. And I know this is difficult to see, but I just have some examples here of like accessioning, processing, and a pathology review or something like that. And it's just showing a status that can be modified as the laboratory actually performs those services. So again, this gets away from a standalone request system where somebody goes in and just says, I want something done, and then emails have to go back and forth, or phone calls have to be made about the status of it, or whatever. The person that actually makes the request can go in here and see the status of their request as it gets processed throughout the lab. And honestly, this is the coolest thing and the most powerful part of it, in my opinion. So if anybody has used forms in OpenSpecimen, you know that forms are pretty flexible. So it's just like other tools like RedCap or whatever. You're building a form, you could go in and create your user interface controls and add whatever types of data and that you want to record. The projects and requests module in OpenSpecimen does the same thing. So you can create your forms to collect any kind of information that you want about a project or about a request. So here's just an example of our main project form. So we've extended kind of that base functionality that I talked about in the previous slide, where it was just the PI, the collaborator, and the laboratory. And now we're collecting all this other information about, the IRB, when the IRB expires, and if it's, non-human subjects, samples and things like that. And of course, this works with the skip logic that's already implemented in OpenSpecimen. So you can have, if a radio button toggled, it could, hide or expand on different fields and things like that. So it becomes pretty powerful. So here's an example of kind of what that looks like. And again, I know this is, it's a poor screenshot and it doesn't show up very well in PowerPoint, but this is an extension of our request form. So, we have very specific things, and we worked with the tissue procurement core to design this. Now, again, you don't need to be a programmer. You don't need to have any kind of special skills to do this stuff. It's pretty straightforward. And, we'd be happy to provide this. This is, it's nothing secret that we could provide the file that we use that generates this form as a starting point if somebody wants to make modifications to it. But you can see it's very specific to our core. But again, sometimes it's easier to have something to start with than just fresh, which is nothing. You kind of have to start somewhere. So that's what that looks like. The setup is pretty easy. So basically, like Lee said about our training, the projects is one of our training modules that he did a great job of, and it actually worked out really well. That we used to do in-person training, which was nice for the bigger laboratories, but there's a lot of overhead in doing that, especially if you're meeting one-on-one or you have a one-off request. So having those available electronically for somebody to go into and complete the training works out great. So she created one for projects that they go in and learn about how it works, and then we could set them up as a user to create their own projects and create their own requests. So basically, there's two modes for projects to be approved. And when we were working with Krishagni as collaborators on designing this module, we thought that we thought that it would be good to have kind of this stopping point where a user would go in and create a project, and then, conceptually the idea was that somebody at the tissue procurement core would kind of do a, quote unquote scientific review and say, well, this is silly. They're requesting something we can't do, or this doesn't make sense, or whatever. But then we found that just shifts kind of the overhead to them that they didn't necessarily want. So that's kind of the second bullet point here. You can have this manual approval where that project has to be approved before requests can be made against it, or you can have this automatic approval. And what we did was we flipped to the automatic one, so the user can actually go in and create their own project. It's approved immediately, and then they can start creating requests against that. Works out perfectly. So there's also flexibilities on being able to place the specimens in the request either manually or to manually enter them, or to actually build a specific report or query around that. There's ability to turn off email notifications. So this was kind of a big thing that that was, again, the one of the first requirements was that that folks that were placing these requests in the old system had no idea what was happening to these. When's my request going to be done? When's it scheduled to be done? Has it even been started? Things like that. And so, that was relayed to the Khrushchev team when we were designing this, and they said, yeah, we'll turn on notifications that could go out when the lab actually, completes a service, and that service is changes status. An email could go out and notify that user, so they have an idea of actually what's being done. So in theory and concept, really good idea. And then what we found out was in practice, nobody wants to see that many notifications. So you have the ability to toggle that depending on your institution and your users. And also setting up site services. So there's a way that you could kind of have that, curated list of, the tissue procurement core only has, a set number of things that they do. They might not do, flow cytometry or some other, specialized review, histology review and whatnot. And so you could set that up at the site level on actually what they do, so users can't, go and make up services that they wish that lab would do. So that's kind of that was kind of the setup of being able to use projects. So, and now kind of switching gears to somebody who's actually going in and creating a project and just talk about their workflow. But again, the project is set up where you can create requests against it. It's a one-time deal. They don't have to create multiple projects, especially if it's, one that they're still doing collections against, and they're still submitting services against those specimens. In our environment, they are automatically approved, like we discussed. And then, we have these customized forms that we created that collect a whole bunch of other information that, the tissue procurement core was dying to get their hands around this information and recording it actually offline in Excel for a while. And the cancer center itself needed information about which studies were actually cancer, so that we could apply subsidies to billing and things like that. So that gets all tied into this process. And here's another screenshot just to give you a very high level view. This is, again, this doesn't exist out of the box. This is just the form that we created and what it looks like. So an end user would go in here and see this when they're creating a new project. This is blown up a little bit, so you can see some of the fields. And then again, the project's done. Now they're creating a request. Pretty straightforward there. Their requests are automatically approved once submitted, and this is kind of what that form looks like. So kind of blow this up a little bit here so you can see what the actual requests look like. So somebody can request that they are that they have 3 serum specimens that they want stored away. And this is all, again, controlled list of services. So we talked about from the end user's point of view, they're going in and they're creating the project, they're creating the request, and that's all fine and dandy. Now the laboratory needs to do something. So what's their workflow like? Well, they have a dedicated, what they call laboratory project manager, that manages these different projects. So they make sure that the specimens are pulled if they're in the freezer and they're processed appropriately, and that's the person that actually goes in and updates the service so that the project request actually reflects the services that are done to those specimens. So since we turned off notifications, one of the workflows was that this person would get notified every time a request would come in, and they could kind of manage that out of their inbox. But really what happens, what we found is they live in OpenSpecimen. They just live in the project's module and watch requests as they come through, and keeps an eye on them and processes those as needed. So that's kind of their main charge as far as the that type of project management and facilitation through the laboratory. And this is what it looks like from the request point of view from just a specimen list, very, very basic. But just to show you that you can have a list of defined specimens. So this is just an example of that. And here's a request. And the only thing I was trying to highlight here was the statuses down at the bottom. So you have it shows our processing is complete, our molecular is still in progress, and we have some services that haven't been started yet. So that's actually beneficial for the user that places a request, and also for the laboratory, so they understand kind of what's in queue, and they could prioritize workflows that way throughout the laboratory. And even though notifications are, email notifications are turned off, we still have a history, and this is just fantastic. So you could figure out who approved things or who touched the request, and kind of this way. So you don't have to dig through your Outlook to look for a history of why things were done or when things were done. It's all maintained within OpenSpecimen. And that is all I had. First, I want to ask Lee if I missed anything critical.
So I wanted to mention that you could also run a query. So researchers or coordinators can run a query in the system. They can add those specimens to a request that way, and they will bump into that form that that Dave just showed for the request. So you can either hand enter them, or you can run a query and go to like the actions button and add those specimens into a request, which makes it pretty convenient.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Right, so let us take up a couple of questions that has come up in the chat. And I think you showed this, Dave, in one of these slides. The question came up actually before that slide, but just to clarify, so can I find all the specimens that were released in a particular request? So you showed that slide where you had the list of specimens in a project. And so what other reporting do you do other than, there's a download button here, I suppose, to download the report? I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't interact with OpenSpecimen this way, so I'll probably let Lee talk more about how she thinks users interact with it. But I imagine you could look at it from the laboratory's point of view. If they're creating a pull list of, for example, specimens that actually need to be pulled again from that freezer to be processed, and then you could look at it from the requester's point of view. If they're downloading a list or printing a list that they can use to bring to the laboratory, is kind of like a manifest. But Lee, do you have a sense for how that's utilized?
So the specimens you can see on this page, but you can also query for a request, and it'll list the specimens that way.
Right. So yes, the reporting module is kind of integrated with the project tracker, so you can then generate lots of interesting reports, either raw data reports or even count-based reports, like per project, how many specimens were released, etc., or processed, etc. So there are a couple of non-project tracker questions. I'll come to that later. So there is a question from Nitin: do you have to develop and maintain a separate database or project tracker, or is it based on the same database? So let me take that. So Nitin, it's in the same database. So from an operations point of view or from IT management point of view, there is pretty much nothing that you need to do. Everything is in a single database. So I had two questions for you for you, Dave. So one is it about 6 months now or more that this is live? I just wanted to get a perspective since how long is this module live now, because it's a pretty recent development.
Yeah, I was actually doing a little bit of research on that, so that I could have that in my head before I presented about it. We started talking about the development in 2019, and looks like we finished around September, October timeframe of 2019. And the laboratory actually was, they were going through their workflow adjustments and testing it. We went live in January of 2020.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. That's longer than what I thought. So given that, do you have any even ballpark numbers of, say, how many projects or how many requests you guys have processed so far? Like, what's the scale of usage?
Yeah, I actually didn't look at that. It's a lot. I mean, it's like the requests are coming in daily. So I don't know. Lee, have you looked? I honestly don't know, but I know it's used daily as far as the requests, but I have no idea of the count.
Yeah, I don't have a specific count for that, but again, the project coordinator at the TPC she's in there daily handling requests and projects.
Yeah, so pretty much it's very actively used on a daily basis is what I was trying to get to. There's a question from Richard: can users other than the actual requester see the status of a particular request? Let me answer that.
So if you're an associated user at the project level, you will be able to see the status of the request, and you'll be able to go in there and view all the requests under that project.
Right. So everything is pretty much based on your roles and also whether you are associated with that project, and that's how broadly how OpenSpecimen works across the platform, in terms of everything depends on your roles, privileges, and your association with that specific object that you're dealing with. So and we are at the end. So I see there are couple of non-project tracker questions. I'll take that too. But before that, Lee or Dave, do you want to just are there any wish list in terms of what kind of new things that you would like to see in the, say, the next 1 year, 2 year, things changing in the project tracker?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I keep talking with the TPC about. And surprisingly, they are very happy with the way it is. I mean, for a first iteration, that is pretty amazing. And I think it has to do a lot with the forms, that we were able to build forms that they wanted to look and feel the way that they wanted them to. And that was, again, a big part of it. One thing that I want to see from the cancer center's point of view is integrating the services with OpenSpecimen billing functionality at some point. And I think we've talked about that a couple times, but if we could do that, I think that would round out things very nicely.
Right. And there's one question that came up just now. Do you allow requests from outside institutions, or is it pretty much within WashU? And is there a different workflow if it is coming from outside WashU?
Yeah, that's a good question. This workflow that we talked about is only for internal, and I don't think we ever had a request for an external institution going through projects, right, Lee?
Yeah, we haven't had that.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that would stop it, because we do allow external access to OpenSpecimen. It is publicly available outside the Washington University network. So yeah, I don't think there's anything that would stop us from doing that.
Sure, sure. So the next question is something that we had spent, a lot of time when we were developing this. Is about it's coming from Donna from University of Utah. So are all these specimens? Is it necessary that all the specimens are already in the system? Can specimen labels? Can you just create new specimens or request for new specimens that are not in OpenSpecimen yet?
Yeah. So there can be a request against external specimens. That was one of our main functionalities as well. It doesn't happen too often. What we see is the main users that are placing requests already have specimens in OpenSpecimen, but there is nothing that stops somebody from loading an external list of specimens that need to be processed. Now, it gets a little tricky when those specimens are processed and we talk about, services, tracking services and tracking billing and things like that. So at some point, those need to be instantiated with an OpenSpecimen, either to a distribution protocol or a collection protocol or whatnot, so that we can further track services on those. But right now, there's nothing that would stop that type of request from coming through.
Right. So Donna, what we allow people to do is attach a CSV file along with the request, saying that these are the 100 specimens that we need, and then therefore the lab has to now take care of us creating those specimens in OpenSpecimen and then processing them. So while the request can have specimens that are not in OpenSpecimen, but for the request to be processed, completed, etc., the lab staff have to first create those specimens in OpenSpecimen. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of the hour. There are a few other questions that are non-project tracker. I'll take that up. But Dave, anything to wrap up?
No. Thanks very much for the opportunity to present.
Thanks a lot, Dave. So I'll just answer questions from the chat. Does OpenSpecimen have an auditing feature to perform governance of audits, etc.? So yes, so 100% of the data or the operations that you do in OpenSpecimen is audited to the extent that it tracks where was it done, what was the old value, what is the new value, IP address of the person who has done it, etc., etc. The next question is from Prasad, which talks about has QAgram capabilities, which I am not aware what it means. So Prasad, if you can send me an email offline, I'll have a look at what it is and get there. So since I don't even know what it is, obviously it does not have that capability, but I'll try to figure out what it does. Yeah, so Damien asks, is OpenSpecimen customized for each institution? Not really. So this is everything that you see. Basically, we differentiate between what is customization and what is configuration. So configuration is where it's the same product, but you do different things. Customization is where you actually have to do code changes or programming to do something. So everything that you see right now in this demo or in general, what we show is all configurations. It's a single version of the project, just that it's configured differently for different institutes, as well as within an institute, it could be configured different for different groups or different for different protocols. So that's it. Thanks everyone for joining. Especially thanks to Dave and Lee for this. The first time we did, so something very interesting. And we do have another webinar next month with which the details are shared on the forums. Thanks everyone, and talk to you in the next webinar.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much. Very interesting presentations.
Thank you.